Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Excuse me. My name is Chris Wofford. I'm from eCornell, and I am joined by Liz Karns from
Hi.
Cornell University's ILR School. Thanks for joining us, Liz.
Thank you.
So as you know, because you signed up, today we're going to be talking about the lifetime costs of sexual assault, sexual violence, and misconduct, and of course, all the lasting effects, whether it be health, education, relationships, career, and how so many aspects of one's life can suffer as a result of sexual violence. And today we're going to be kind of focusing a little bit on how that plays out in the workplace, and we have some data associated with data collected over the last 30 years or so that is absolutely compelling and kind of mind-blowing to think about. A couple things, a couple notes before we kind of move too much further forward. This discussion is going to be recorded. It's recording right now, so you'll be able to access this anytime afterward. Per the instructions in the Connect window, if you could keep your chats and your questions going through there, I'll be looking at them on my phone, so we'll take your questions in as they come and intersperse them with the discussion. So ask questions anytime, and we'll make sure we hit those. Other than that, not too many notes, but I am particularly excited to have Liz here today. We've been talking a lot about this over the last hour or so. And I'm so interested in your particular experience. You are an epidemiologist and also a lawyer.
That's right.
So you're coming at this from two very interesting angles that together make for a really compelling story. So tell me a little bit about when you started looking at this and your experience.
Yeah. So I think, frankly, it's hard to be a woman and not be aware of sexual assault and misconduct issues, right? So we're all, I think, more than ever aware of the issue. But growing up, this was always one of those things where you have to be aware of it. It was on your mind. As a epidemiologist, I started thinking about it just in terms of the types of data we would have, right? But it wasn't until I went to law school, like 13 years after being an epidemiologist, that I started applying it to sexual assault. And in that context, I treated, and I continue to treat, those cases just as I would any type of medical malpractice case or environmental harm case. They are the exact same set of ways that we assess damage, let's say.
Okay.
Okay? So we need the studies, we need the research, we need the experts. And it's been a while coming that we've got all of those things together. But at this point, we have so much research, so much information that makes it quite clear that the cost is a lifetime cost, and that currently it is usually the victim, who pays for that. And that's my interest, is to shift that.
Yeah, clearly. So we're going to get into that a little bit. Let's talk about some of the data that you look at. We're going to get into it in the slides a little bit, but what kind of inputs are you looking to?
So one of the things I've looked at is Title IX cases on campuses, right? How many people come forward with complaints versus the surveys that we do every year to see how many people state that they were assaulted, right? Those are anonymous complaints versus the ones who actually use the system. Okay. And it is not surprising that not many people use the system. Right. Right?
I suspected that was the case.
Yeah. We now have 10 years of data that we've put together on that. And it's, one of those things where nobody knows how to solve this problem. But we have to start with saying, so what are the outcomes of interest and how do we tackle it? What interventions should we be using? Do different judicial systems work better, right? Or maybe the schools shouldn't be involved at all. That's another issue, right?
Right.
Lots and lots of issues here.
Okay, good. I think the best way to move forward actually is to get into the slides themselves. Yeah. Let's take a look here, because I think what we're really trying to achieve here, right, is to understand what the lifetime costs are, what the damages that are done, and of course, in the end, we're going to get into a situation where you're going to make a compelling case for shifting the damages over to the perpetrators and the people that commit the acts. Yeah.
So this is me, in case anybody needs to send me a note. I am more than happy to respond to emails.
Great, thank you.
In 2015, we had like a banner year of doing lots of different studies. And these studies were all essentially asking the same thing, which was, have you been sexually assaulted while in college? And there was some slight difference in terms of the phrasing. This was a study that was done by Kaiser and the Washington Post, and we have 25% of people who were assaulted since starting college, 20% for women, 5% for men. And we see pretty similar pattern across all the different places, right? It never varies in a big way. The one that says 27 AAU, this was a study that Cornell was part of. We had 27 different colleges that did the same survey. And it's important to have this information because it's consistent across studies. There's so many people who will say, oh, but people just make that up, or it was dependent on the respondents. There's been a lot of reliability and validity testing on this, and this is solid data. The sad thing is that this is the exact same data that we had in 1987, right?
Yeah.
The numbers are the same since 1987.
So this roughly 20% is a consistent thing and has not changed.
It has
with
not changed
anything.
Nope. All the interventions that we've had so far have not changed things. This is some of the research that we've worked on is to look at the overall U.S. population of students. So you have a little over 10 million students, likely about 300,000 assaults in a year. Only 2% of those actually report those to the school. And when you look at what happens to a student as they go through the reporting process, it's not surprising, right? Not at all. So I'm not as interested in just improving reporting rates. I want to actually look at the cost of sexual assault. And the reasons I want to do that are as listed here, right? Obviously to help the person. It really helps people understand that what they are experiencing and their life trajectory, why it seems like it's hard to get it back on course, is in part because they are bearing these costs. Hold the perpetrator responsible. That's a pretty straightforward one. Create policies which would address the costs. And then finally, imagine if we had a world where we didn't have to pay this. Right? I think it's important for us to think about the fact that we spend $2.3 billion a year related to sexual assault. That's huge.
Is this in the U.S.?
U.S. only.
Okay.
U.S. only.
Yeah.
And this is an underestimate. This CDC recognizes that this does not include all of the pain and suffering sorts of things. It is strictly the medical costs, lost wages, and criminal justice.
Which we're going to look at in pretty detailed view in a minute here.
Yep. So we could be spending $2.3 million on something else. But we're spending it on this. Billion.
Yeah.
Billion. Okay, part of the reason that we add this up is that money matters. Somehow when we start attaching a price tag, people become more accountable. And the different systems that we look at are the legal systems, right? We've got the criminal and the civil system. And the financial obligation that arises out of that, like let's imagine that a perpetrator is found guilty and under the criminal system ordered to pay restitution. That means they have to pay the victim money. And that is a contract now that cannot be discharged under personal bankruptcy. Right? So it is something that will stay with that perpetrator forever until they've paid it off.
Wow.
And that would change the world.
I would imagine, right?
Yep. This is the standard approach to all injuries, right? This is exactly what's used in your car accidents, your slip and falls, medical malpractice, everything else. So it's interesting that people don't think of it when it comes to sexual assault. So that's part of my job, is to articulate it and make people think about that.
And you had discussed it in terms of it's effectively a PTSD. A post-traumatic stress disorder, right?
So I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, or anything, but what happens to people in terms of their, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but there is a response that is going to be triggered every time you are in a stressful situation. It doesn't have to be the exact same situation you were in. You're probably not going to be in that again. But when you go to negotiate a salary, that's a stressful time. And if you are negotiating with your boss and that's a man and that brings up other issues for you, you might not do as good a job at negotiating.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Just for starters.
Right.
Okay, so if we assign dollars, we'll get societal change. I'm quite sure about this one. So I want to talk about a fictional case because I think it helps lay out what it looks like. Because that $2.3 billion is hard to get a grip on. So we have Betsy, who's our fictional case, hypothetical. She's a sophomore in college. She pays $30,000 a year in tuition. And she's studying nursing. She's had past internships. She's clearly on this trajectory, right? And she wants to be a registered nurse. She's taken a full course load, which is equal to 4 courses. Very typical college student, has $20,000 in student loans. And she's assaulted in the first semester of her sophomore year. Okay? So the costs start immediately, day one. First one, transportation, right? She's been assaulted, wants to get away. So I'm just going to make it up at $20, right? She calls a cab, whatever it is. But she needs to get away. Plan B, right? The emergency contraceptives. She hadn't planned to spend this. You go buy that from the pharmacy, it's $50. Hospital ER, right? You go into the hospital, to the emergency room, and the first thing they ask you is, could we see your insurance card, right? That cost is a minimum of $1,000. STD testing and drugs, and the rape evidence kit. These things are supposed to be covered by the state, but frequently they are not, right? Or we've all heard about the failure of them to test the rape evidence kits. We've got thousands and thousands of those. So if she wants to actually think about a case, she needs to pay for that as well. Her time in the hospital. I'm just going to say it costs her $11 an hour. She's got a work-study job or something, right? Really, really nominal. It takes 8 hours to sit there in the hospital for all of this to happen. This is not a quick process. She has to start making some decisions. We'll give her some charges for that. And spending time with the authorities. Finally, clothing replacement. $100. Because her clothing is going to go to the police, probably, right, as evidence. So that very first day, she's got a cost of $3,200, right? And this isn't what Betsy thought she was going to be doing, right? But what happens in the first month is even more dramatic. She goes to the Title IX office, and so we're going to say that took some time. Most colleges don't have enough counselors, so she seeks private counseling, which is a good thing. I encourage that. That's money out of pocket. So these costs, I'm just going to keep adding them up, and I think people can appreciate how these come together. The one about intrusive thoughts, though, this is very typical of sexual assault survivors, that they'll be sitting there and trying to focus on their schoolwork, and then suddenly, boom, their head is in a different place, and it's hard to gather your thoughts again. That has the effect of one entire course. I've seen this many times, and it's as if they are taking another full course just to deal with this process. So in that first month, we're now up to another $4,000. Okay, so we can go through this in the first semester. Likely to drop the course. Well, when you drop a course, then you're also going to lose financial aid if you go beneath a certain number, right? Start thinking about transferring to another school. That costs money to transfer, right? Why are you transferring? Because the situation reminds you of it, or because the perpetrator is still there. Right? So these are important issues that every victim is facing. Again, more interrupted time thinking, investigations. And the first semester, boy, this is a very trigger-happy one. That first semester is going to be almost $12,000, right? So we're continually adding up the cost here. Now, Betsy, like many people, thinks about, you know what, I'm just going to stop going to school. I'm just going to take some time off. But after 6 months, you have to start paying back your student loans. For people who don't pay back their or who don't finish school, the likelihood of them defaulting on that student loan is 43%, 43.5%. And it drops with the more that you've completed, all right? Now, if you default on a student loan, there are jobs you can't apply for. right? You are ineligible for certain jobs, quite a lot of jobs, actually. And so Betsy starts realizing she can't do the job that she was training for because she's defaulted on her loan, right? So in that first year, she has a spiral, downward spiral, and we're going to talk about her addiction costs, right? Very likely she's self-medicating through either alcohol or drugs. She drops out of school entirely. Remember, it's 2 years gone now. She's paid for tuition, so that's money gone.
Yeah.
Her addiction treatment, additional insurance. Okay, so after that first year, we're up to $66,000. And Betsy has a very different life now, very different than in that first semester. And her trajectory has changed enormously. We start seeing over her lifetime that she's 6 times more likely to have PTSD, right? That her executive function impact, the cognitive function, there's a lot of different ways that we can test this, but we see that even 50 years after assault, people have an executive function impact. These experiences, if they are not processed in any way, lead to permanent cognitive change, right? So one of the goals is to really address the PTSD, really think about that and figure out what we can do. They're more likely to have chronic diseases, right? She's more likely to have an ulcer, not surprising. Asthma, well, that's a little bit odder. Arthritis, right? Things that impair your working life.
Can I ask you about the diagnosis of PTSD? Is that forgive my ignorance, but I mean, is that you go to see you go to see a doctor, right?
Yep.
Somebody who knows about this stuff. You are experiencing PTSD.
Yep.
How does that figure into like the legal case or the? It just seems like squishy ground to me. And
right. So yeah, with any diagnosis,
yeah,
right? There's for a psychological sort of thing. There are certain things that they are looking for and symptoms and asking you about frequency, things like that.
Okay.
So the person initially talks to the psychiatrist and then talks about different situations that this arises in, right? To figure out how invasive is it in their life. I have had people who could not go to covered parking lots ever again in their lives, right?
Yep.
And that meant that they would drive 50 miles out of the way to go to a different train station because they didn't want to use that one that had the covered parking lot.
Right.
That meant that she couldn't take certain jobs, right? So it's got this sort of ripple effect.
Yes, exactly. So what I'm getting at, or where I was going with that, was linking, this particular diagnosis
Yep.
to these behaviors, and I wonder often how that plays out legally.
Yeah.
You know what
I mean? It's absolutely part of the case because you've got first the initial injury, right, which is the assault itself.
Yes.
And that doesn't have a huge amount of value, honestly.
Right.
Like in terms of money. But the ways that it impairs one's life after that are what get documented. And that is the job of the lawyer, to go through and describe, like, there's different techniques, a day in a life. You bring in different experts to say this person will have a very predictable set of problems when they have their own children, right? So that's a cost that you should be thinking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the expert is who ties this person's diagnosis and situation and then projects it forward. And when I've worked on medical malpractice cases where we had, something happening to an infant, we would do the same thing. We'd say, this is what their life looks like in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, behavioral health. Again, this is not a big surprise that they are more likely to be using alcohol or hard drugs. And they're aware that they need to cut down, right? So they are aware that they're using it as a substitute for treatment, if you will. And then this is the one that the insurance company knows, is that they continually use more health care than non-victims, right? So whenever somebody discusses, gosh, maybe we should decide this is a pre-existing condition, right? You can see why the insurance company is interested in that, because these are very they have higher costs, 20%
Yeah.
higher.
And this is a lifetime
It's a lifetime thing.
thing with the insurance.
Unless you get
engagement.
really early treatment, and we're not sure what happens then. That's our hope.
Yeah, I don't want to get too prescriptive here, but you never know who's in our audience, what they've gone through. But I mean, is this something that somebody should consider immediately right out of the gate, getting a diagnosis? I mean, is this the typical approach?
So when people start acknowledging,
Yeah.
right, that the assault occurred,
Yep.
and that's a process in itself, and realizing that they need counseling, it's not unusual to have a diagnosis come up from that.
And
They
I mean
don't
this.
have to go and they don't have to go and seek a diagnosis to say, boom, I have it, right?
Yeah.
It's going to evolve. And you have the statute of limitations, right? So you have
Yeah.
so many years afterwards. That depends on your state to file this case. And so you don't have to seek it right away, right?
Yeah. I was thinking
Yeah.
from a legal, just plain. This is just a good way to go about it.
Yeah.
Kind of way. If you're going to build a case, right?
Yep. If you're going to build a case, then and you're talking to your lawyer,
Yep.
right, a lawyer, then they will very much ask you, are you in counseling?
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Do you have a diagnosis? Most of us have health insurance that would cover some aspect of that, so there'd be some record of that as well.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. All those costs add up. Yeah,
Yeah. you bet.
absolutely. Okay, so here's the big thing, though, is that Betsy's trajectory changed. Here we have Betsy's life going from age 22 or so, her working life, up to 65. And you remember she was training to be a nurse,
Nurse.
right? So she couldn't get a job as a nurse because she didn't finish the degree. So this is her cumulative lifetime earnings as a nurse's aide. And I see this happen really often, is that people will stay in the same field that they were interested in, but at a lower level, right? So over her lifetime, she'll make about $1.9 million. That sounds like a lot of money, right? But had she become the registered nurse, it would be this orange line, and she would have made well over $4 million. And that difference, that $2.9 million difference there, is what is because of the assault. Okay, so that is the but for. But for the assault, she would have been a nurse, registered nurse. So that difference is what is owed to her and what she's been paying, essentially. And then just a few working life costs, right? She'll have additional insurance use, income differences, right? And then if we add it all up, here's what we have. Day one, month one, first semester, first year, but then it's really the big working life cost.
We're millions and millions of dollars per individual.
Right. And we're not talking about an extreme case here. This is somebody who wanted to be a registered nurse, right? And I didn't build in overtime, and I didn't do anything crazy like that. I just said, great, it'll be a straight, I took the salary off the BLS. But it's $3 million, right? It's $3 million that she ended up not making, didn't have the benefit of, all of those things. So it's a difficult thing to realize, right? Is that because of an event that happened in college, one's trajectory changes, right? You have a very different life.
So you're recommending that and this is correct, that the damages are then directed to the perpetrator legally.
Yep.
What is the state of the law? What's happening out there as far as cases like this? Is this line of thinking adapted?
Yeah. So
okay, so this is nothing. Okay.
this is nothing I'm doing is new. All I'm doing is calling attention to it in a different way.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And the way that I check myself, if you will, is that I look at what are called default cases. So these are cases where the perpetrator, who then became a defendant in civil court, never showed up. And the plaintiff, the person who experienced the assault, has the right to make the argument of what are the costs. And then the judge assesses those costs and decides whether or not they're, warranted,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
They follow the same line of thinking. So it's very much the case that other people see this. It's just not a automatic thought,
That's right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the law exists, and it's actually very straightforward, right? It's the law of any type of injury. And there are some laws which allow for additional types of damages, right? The thing I haven't talked about here is what everybody worries about. It's like pain and suffering. I have not addressed a single pain and suffering payment here.
That's right.
This is all about true economic loss.
What kind of pain? What kind of numbers are we talking about on average when we talk about just a pain and suffering award? Does it
Varies a lot.
How does that work?
So here's the thing: is that most cases never go to court.
They're settled.
They're settled
For $100,000.
We don't know.
But it could be any number, right?
Yeah, because that's all sealed usually.
Yes. Okay.
So, or there's a non-disclosure settlement agreement, and that is something that is very, very well guarded. Let's say, which is why I have to look at these default cases in order to figure out what the average award would look like.
Right.
Yeah, but it depends on the circumstances. I've given sort of the most neutral approach here, right? I have not. Certainly not argued for pain and suffering, didn't argue for a number of other costs, which would be typical. Interruption of relationships, for instance. Requests for in-house treatment for behavioral conditions, right? Or residential treatments, things like that, which are very, very expensive.
Sure, right.
Right? Those typically come up as well in real cases. So is it unusual to come up with a result of $3 million? Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
That's where I was going to get at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What the next stage is that you would bring in an economist and then discount this to present value, right? So that you would understand the true amount.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a lot of experts that should be brought in.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Okay, let me just talk about these different legal remedies that we have and the ways that the cost can add up, or that you can use this cost. The first is the Victims' Compensation Fund. And this is implemented through different states, right? Every state has one. New York State requires that you report to the police within 1 week of the incident. That's really hard for people to do.
Yeah, right.
It's really hard.
They're putting themselves on a course for tremendous complication and
Right.
just mental
Yep.
anguish.
But compensation funds will actually pay for things like therapy, right? So you could get that immediate counseling that you need.
Yeah.
It's just onerous to get there, right? Second one is, I mentioned this before, criminal restitution. This is part of any court process that the criminal court can order the perpetrator to pay the victim. And then finally, civil damages. And this is the one I think most of us are familiar with, where we undertake legal action. The plaintiff, the person who is the victim, brings the case against that defendant. And everything I've talked to today goes into that damages number. And then that number gets used all the way through the civil court process. So demand letter, complaint, arguments. So shifting the burden is what we need to do, right? That is absolutely what we'll have to do. So things we can change. One, sexual assault happens in schools quite a lot. And we need to address the fact that it interrupts their education. And we need to think about a student loan deferral on this, right? It's absolutely mandatory. The legal ones, holding the perpetrators responsible. And then finally, support, right? Engaging survivors in discussions about the economic impact. I recently gave a talk to a bank, actually, And the bank was, in part interested in just thinking about their clientele differently. And
Were
some
they
of
in a
the
state of
different
crisis management or anything?
Nope.
No? Okay.
Nope. This was strictly for their own kind of understanding why people get into different financial situations.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one which I think people don't typically appreciate,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do we have some questions?
Well, I'm going to remind the audience, and
I know I went through a lot of information very quickly.
I know we kind of blazed through that, but it was great. It was well presented, and I think it was really nice. I'm going to ask the audience, please submit some questions to the in the Connect window. I'm looking at it here, and we'll take any of your chat questions. I had a couple more while we're waiting, but please feel free to submit any questions.
Great.
We talked about the timeliness of reporting.
Yeah.
One thing we had talked about was, we couldn't help but talk about the Supreme Court justice, the hearings and
Mm-hmm.
everything that's going on there. There were some issues around, or some sides say that the timing is awful and unfair, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about the lifetime costs associated with this, in the example of the woman who has come forward,
Mm-hmm.
she's been accused of having terrible timing, being an opportunist, or Lord knows where that comes from. But
Right.
what I'm getting at here is, when is it okay to report? Is it ever too late? How do we think about that?
Well, so it's never too late to report.
Right.
And I have had people come up to me after talks and say, so something happened to me 60 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Can I still report that? And I always encourage them to report it. It doesn't mean something's going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? Depends on the state that it happened in and what law would be applicable. So that matters a lot. And some states, there's a statute of limitations on what you can do, certainly in civil court, for these things. So if you want to hold somebody responsible for the economic harms in civil court, then you're going to be limited to how many years you have to do that. And you have to report it by then. So there are some constraints. In her case, that wasn't actually the issue. And it's not clear, nor do I think it matters, really, what her interest is in terms of having a criminal adjudication of this matter.
Right. Yes. Very good
Right?
point. Yep.
That's not what's at issue in that particular
We're looking
case.
at the character of the nominee.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why she spoke out now.
Yeah. So I think they're doing the right thing, which is to request a full investigation.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to take very long. This is
an
a
FBI
very
investigation.
straightforward process.
Yeah.
Every university does these routinely,
Mm-hmm.
right? And many, many different individuals and firms could do this in a short amount of time.
You were asking out loud if universities should really be in the business of investigating these kind of things. How does this translate to the workplace? We have a lot of human resource professionals who are among us today watching this, right?
Yeah.
How does this all play out in the workplace? I mean,
Well, the workplace is different, right, than
Yes.
the university.
Right.
So university, everything comes in through Title IX and the right to have an education free of harassment,
Okay.
right, in a nutshell.
Yep.
The workplace is a whole different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ways that one should think about it, best would be, how do you support the person who has come forward? How do you make sure that they're actually getting the care they need in order to do the job they're hired to do, right? So that's one of the big problems. If it's two people within the workplace and there's a claim of an assault, then, again, I think it should go to the police.
Mm-hmm.
It should be immediately reported to the police. The police do not necessarily have to investigate, and the prosecutor does not have to prosecute.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the frustrations. But nevertheless, the record should be made.
That's right. And then and that's where company policy gets folded in, right? Now we have a criminal working for us, and so on.
Right.
So
Well,
that's typically how that
yeah.
would play out.
Yep. Yeah.
Let me ask you about resources for understanding this a little bit further. We're going to make the PowerPoint slide. Are there any books or anything that you're involved in currently, and any particular research that you think the audience might be curious after having watched what we're talking about here?
Yeah, certainly if anybody is looking at this and thinking, oh, I get this now, I see things in a different way, I would urge them to look at the RAINN, RAINN website, and that is an organization dedicated to victims of rape and sexual assault. And they have a lot of information on that. So rainn.org. I would urge people to go there.
Perfect.
As a start.
Good. Let me check back in with the audience. I'm not seeing any questions now, but I want to give you a chance just to submit anything for Professor Karns. So tell me a little bit about what you teach at school. Anything kind of around this, because I'm actually curious about your broader work.
So I do teach a 7-week course on economic consequences of sexual assault.
Okay.
And that class is a combination of reading legal cases, reading social science research, and reading medical research. It is a class that fills up very quickly, no, not surprisingly.
Right.
And I actually co-teach it with somebody who's a counselor, because lots of issues can come up, and I want to make sure that they have somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. We have, as I had mentioned, we have a lot of human resources professionals in the audience. How should they be thinking about this? I mean, we had talked about the shifting responsibilities of human resources, whether you need to learn, a little bit more about analytics or overall company strategy. It's kind of, it's becoming another thing.
Yeah.
How does, how should the HR pro think about this kind of stuff, given that more people seem to be willing and rightfully emboldened to speak out, and that this is happening more in the workplace, right?
Yep. I think every HR professional should anticipate a big increase over the next 5-10 years of the number of complaints that they receive. And that these are difficult conversations, and that they, not surprising, I'm a lawyer, they should document them very carefully, right? Make sure that they have somebody else involved, and use professional investigators. Don't try it to do it yourself. Like, this is one of the things that I feel like it's very hard to assess the facts when you are enmeshed in the organization.
Yeah.
Right? So there are plenty of others out there who can do this for you. I would encourage them to use those.
Good. Perfect advice.
Yeah. Not something you want to be a specialist in necessarily.
Right.
Right? And you have multiple layers of people impacted. So you've got the victim, you've got the accused, and you've got all the people they work with. So I think HR folks need to be cognizant of that this is not like a standalone event, and, deal with it accordingly.
That's a great way to frame it, actually, right?
Yeah.
It's not an event, it's a process.
Yep.
And we have to consider family and everything else that this can certainly impact.
Yeah. So there's a great number of people who kind of are touched by it, let's say.
Rebecca asks, how does this research translate to other countries? Do you get into any international data sets or trends going on around the world?
Yeah, so here's the big thing, is that many countries have national health insurance. If we had national health insurance, we wouldn't have a need for the big damages in terms of the medical care costs like that.
Right.
And we would have early intervention. Now, does that mean that these other countries do a great job at that? Not necessarily. Not at all. I think there's different levels of people's awareness about this problem and willingness to come forward, because in most places, women still have a very different status than men. And women's earning capacity is very different, so the damages are also very different.
Do you think proposing that damages be shifted to the perpetrator and all that can possibly have any positive preventative effect? It feels like it. Yeah.
Don't you think? I mean, this is the thing nobody really knows. But
right.
If somebody just pauses a little bit before, pushing somebody into a room
Yes.
or deciding that, even though she said no, she really meant yes. Right? That sort of
Yes.
talk. I hear that all the time in different cases. That kind of pause, because of the potential money, that would change things. Yeah.
Good. Another question came in. Maggie asks,
Okay.
and this is all very timely, right? Maggie asked specifically, do you feel the Me Too movement will help for more people to come forward? I think we know the answer, but
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. I think it's absolutely bringing people forward, and at the same time, that means a lot of people are coming down on them,
yeah,
right?
that's right.
So when you come forward, you're also sort of saying, I have enough strength to endure that new second wave of animosity, right? When we look at Professor Ford and the fact that she's getting death threats, right? I'm not surprised to hear that. Not at all surprised. And that is the sort of thing that when you go public with information, a lot of people don't like it, even if they have no right on it.
Yeah, she's taking tremendous risk.
Yeah.
Her life will never be the same again.
Right, for a whole second wave. And, the thing is, those death threats, every one of those is a crime. So the FBI could be investigating every one of those death threats as a crime. And I hope they do.
Wow.
Those are standalone crimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good. I'm not seeing any other questions come in, but I do want to thank the audience and thank you for coming and hanging out today. As mentioned, I will email all of you the link to the recording, which is the same as you've just watched here. We'll send the slide deck as well. Thanks for that.
Yes.
Perfect. And for the rest of you, I can't wait to see you at the next event. I know we took a little break there for a couple months because we're improving the platform. We've changed the studio a little bit. I'm very interested in your feedback, so please, I'm going to send you some surveys after this as well to just get a sense of what you think. So again, Professor Karns, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, audience. We'll see you next time, and register for any future HR and women in leadership events on your dashboard. Thank you.